and moving forward.
Tonight's talk is the second on our fortnightly talks about the psychological series of Joanna De Angelis. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Joanna, she is a spirit who has for many years been the spirit guide to our most famous living spiritist medium, Divaldo Franco. Through Divaldo's mediumship and books, the spiritist teachings of Joanna are studied and followed by vast numbers of people across the whole world. Let me say a few words about our speaker, Dr. Vanessa Anseloni. She is a neuroscientist and psychologist, and is the founder of the School of Emotion, founder of Kardec Radio, and also editor-in-chief of the Spiritist magazine. Vanessa has been serving in the Spiritist movement for many years as a medium, a spiritual counselor, writer, as a coordinator of spiritual treatments across the world. Also, she has served for many years in the United States in the Spiritist Society in Baltimore, Virginia, and Washington. Before Vanessa talks to us, let's go over to Lawrence Saville at the Poole Christian Spiritualist Church for our opening prayer.
Thank you, Fabricio. So friends, if you could just draw into that silence once more, leaving outside all the material worries and concerns for this short time. And draw on that bright light, that thread of divinity that runs through all things. And we ask that this night, that our minds be opened, that we draw together, that we learn, understand, and raise our vibrations. Through learning and education, gives us the tools to walk the more spiritual path, to be able to be of service to others, and understand our own direction also. So we place this evening in thy loving care and keeping. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lawrence. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Vanessa Anseloni for her talk in the psychological series of Joanna De Angelis entitled Existential Conflicts. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Fabricio. Thank you, Lawrence. It's a joy to be here talking about such an important topic, existential conflicts. Who doesn't have them? We won't find anybody on earth who doesn't bump on existential conflicts. I'll share my screen now to share some information with you, because the studies we're talking about, they converge the science of psychology, a little bit of neuroscience, and the teachings of Spiritism in its overall literature, and of course, in Joanna De Angelis' book, Existential Conflicts. So, would like to share with you a little bit. Okay. One second. Here it is. There you go. If we can just bring, thank you so much, Lawrence. So here we have existential conflicts. When we talk about existential conflicts, we need to know what they are, right? What are they? Because you're like, oh, conflicts. I have conflicts myself, Vanessa. Then what else? So let us go through, questions we have. Existential questions, right? The meaning of life. What is life all about? Why am I doing here? Now during the pandemic, it has boosted a lot of these existential conflicts in us, right? Many people decided to get married, majority to get divorced, or to do something different, change homes. If you look at the real estate market in the United States, it gave it a boom because many people are like, my house is too small, I don't want to live in an apartment, or the reverse. So they're moving. The real estate has never been so good here in the US because of the crisis as well. And many people asking, what is happening to me? People buying dogs, pets, because they feel lonely or their children are lonely, etc. So existential questions have been brought up again. When we go to science, I won't extenuate and overwhelm anybody here, giving a lot of scientific materials. But I picked one article that was written by scientists in psychology by the University of Arizona, Colorado, and in Amsterdam. The group by Dr. Poole, Greenberg, and Pazinski. They talk about the science to the psychology of the soul. What a name, huh? Published in the current directions in psychological science. Beautiful name, Science to the Psychology of the Soul. And at a certain point, they summarize in this table the big 5 existential concerns. And what are they? So they not only talk about what it is, defining it, but they also give us a reference to the summary of all of it by different authors, some in their group, some in other groups, collaborators of theirs. So first is the concern of death. Right now, during the pandemic, more than ever, everybody has been thinking about death. Even people who were like, don't talk about it. Now it's in the news all the time. The numbers of people who are dying, it's like mass death. It is. Just September 11 alone, 3,000 people were dead. In the United States, we surpassed that mark at a daily basis. So death is now in our face. What about when we feel it as an existential concern? And what would that be? The awareness of the inevitability of death versus the desire to continue living. And then isolated, precisely what's happening during the pandemic. Though we may have this existential conflict in us about isolation, irrespective of the pandemic, but now during the pandemic, it came back with greater strength. Not for everybody, but for many people. It's that need to feel connected to others thanks to the internet. This pandemic has been much easier than the last one in the 20th century when we didn't have internet, phones, versus the experiences of rejection, which neuroscience shows to us. It really hurts physically when we feel rejected, and the realization that one's subjective experience of reality can never be fully shared. Now, what about the existential conflict related to identity? Who am I? Nowadays, because of the redefinition of gender, we have many people, especially in youth or parents, when they get to know of the sex of the baby, like they want to know, should I name them or not? Allow them to name themselves, etc. These are current considerations that would fall into the category of existential concerns related to identity. It's like, who am I? But it's not only about gender, it's about who we are. Who am I in the environment where I live in and the consequences of it all? Then there is also the existential conflict related to freedom, which is so important for us to feel that we're free to choose nowadays, also because of the coronavirus and the pandemic. We have been restricted in so many ways, and especially teenagers are having a hard time dealing with those restrictions and constrictions, and some are delving within the abyss of drug addictions, sex addictions. We're talking about sex addictions now with the pandemic. the boost of pornographic websites, more people seeking it to relieve why, that freedom that they feel they lost and escaping. And we're going to talk about these mechanisms that we do to deal with existential conflicts. And the big one, the big of all existential conflicts, meaning. What is the meaning of life? And it comes to us here, spiritualists, spiritists, we who know that life is much more than the body can perceive, than we with our physical eyes can see, or with our ears hear, with our nose smell, with our hands and whole body touch, or taste with our mouth. The meaning of life is beyond sweet, sour, it's beyond bitter, it's beyond salty or umami. When we talk about taste, when we talk about people, about the meaning of life, we're talking about this desire to believe that life is meaningful versus the events and experiences that appear random or inconsistent with the meaning of our lives. This is just a quick glance at how science, psychology, psychological sciences are assessing the main conflicts we have within us. And the first question is, because this is not pure academic, this conversation we are having here is not an academic lecture. I cannot turn it into a pure code knowledge. We need to stop and verify, have an inner assessment, and ask, of these big five existential concerns, is there any or more than one? And do you recognize in you some of them nowadays? If you don't need to ask this question, should I? No, you don't have to incur in stumbling into those concerns, but it's just so human. Even children go through it. And we may ask why, right? Well, I don't think psychology can explain it to the fullest, but spiritism, spiritualism can tell us we're much more than this life. So when we see a child, we're seeing a millennial spirit connected to a child's body. Their emotional concerns, their cognitive needs are beyond just this life. So when we talk about these existential conflicts, we know that they are going to somewhat generate a lot of emotions in us. A lot of emotions. At the end of the day, when we talk about who we are emotional beings. Dr. Antonio Damasio at University of California in San Diego, one of the most important leading forces in the understanding of ourselves as emotional beings, he talks about us being emotional beings and how important it is to understand our emotions to reason well. So we can almost conclude that people like Kardec, they were doing so well emotionally because his reasoning was so sharp. Sharp reasoning in all facets of life and features of life, they depend on a well-balanced emotional life. That's why we're going to march towards understanding how these existential conflicts will emerge in forms of our emotions. We're going to use not only, but mostly, Joanna De Angelis' book, Existential Conflicts, to talk about some of the main emotions that are constantly bumping into our existential concerns regarding death, isolation, identity, freedom, and meaning of life. And what are they? First of all, Joanna De Angelis talks about what we do when we realize that we're cornered by life in terms of being conflicted. And did you know that that's the reason why we reincarnate? To redress those conflicts that come with us way before we connected to the first cell of our bodies at conception, as Kardec explains in the Spirit's book. The union of the body and spirit, and repeats in more extended form in the Genesis by Allan Kardec. We're going to see that we tend to escape. Escapism. And why do we escape, right? We look at this road, snowy and stormy, and we want to run away, go somewhere. How many of us during the pandemic, there are days that are so tiresome, you wish you could enter your car or a plane or a private jet, preferably, and fly somewhere else where there's no coronavirus. The problem is, where is coronavirus not? Where is it not? It's everywhere. So there's no way to escape. When people say, oh, it's safe there, you never know. You never know. So that's why we say to people, stay put. When I see people traveling on Facebook, especially spiritists, I feel so sorry for them that they are not only risking their lives, other people's lives, but inciting people who are on the other end watching their posts. And this is not envy. This is not spite. It's just sad because that's a behavior that is not in check with our, let's say, most politically correct and publicly safe attitude. So escaping nowadays has been at higher level, especially for people who bump into some of these existential conflicts. Am I going to die? So then some teenagers say, well, then if I have to catch it, I don't care. Let's party all day, night, all night long. And if we catch it, we catch it. If we die, at least we died partying. Some people are like that. They behave like that, escaping away in risky ways. We would say in neuroscience, they lack great maturity in their prefrontal cortex when they take decisions that are so high risk like that. Or when people say, I'm not going to use masks, and they feel like, I want to show my smile and I want to make people happy. But nowadays, people are making masks with transparent mouth, and it's already found here in the US, even in supermarkets. And we can show our smiles, but in a safe way. Though science is showing that we using two masks is even better. Of course, you could almost foresee it, that this would be something scientifically proven. And we see nowadays people conflicted about the restrictions of their freedom. And when we see that they are taking risks in spite of it all, we're seeing them taking the escape mechanism. What are the causes, psychological causes, for our escape mechanisms? Joanna De Angelis summarizes in a way that is quite interesting. The overload of the nervous system by disturbing emotions. There you go, we told you. It's all about emotions at the end of the day. Because when we feel that something is negative, is a threat, we tend to escape. Because we were built to preserve ourselves. And then we tend to transfer the more difficult emotions so we can accept what we have. Some parts of it will be totally unconscious, and then we generate escape mechanisms. Some people will escape in alcoholic behavior, others in sexual behaviors, others in orthodox beliefs. Other people will be what we're seeing nowadays. overloaded by misinformation because they feel that dreaming about a hero that doesn't exist, that is deceiving them, a demagogue, is going to save them from that strange life that they can't break down in a different way. And then they find out soon enough that nobody's going to save them but themselves. But till then, they will escape. In some way, we have this instinct of preservation inside of us, and it's purely instinctive, mechanical. It's in the Spirit's book by Kardec in question 702. And oftentimes, it's not even rational. Look at animals. If you corner them into an unpleasant scenario, they're going to try to escape in some way and form. We have an inbuilt system in our brain, not only the limbic system, but mostly, that processes our emotions. And this is in animals too. So the other day I was explaining to another group in Brazil about an experiment that I've done when I was back in college, preparing for graduate school. And I remember this teacher saying, Vanessa, since we're studying emotions and the brain, we need to show you fear. And I said, okay. So this is at the University of São Paulo in Brazil, in a very reputable lab at the School of Medicine. And there we are doing a surgery. Of course, it's a neurosurgery in a lab animal with all the loving care of anesthesia and everything else. And inserting a certain electrode in an area of the brain, in this case, the amygdala. And then, after the healing of the animal, we connect that electrode to a system that would pass a current. So, rest assured, we don't give shocks to the brain, because that's not how it works, but we pass currents because our brain works in a chemical and electrical way through its neurons. So once we pass a certain current, the animal that was quiet in its cage suddenly jumped and started running as if it were being chased by a predator. And I would never forget it. He said, you see, this is what it is. Now I pause for a moment and share with you that as much as an electrical current can stimulate a certain area of the brain to create fear, we can also stimulate to overcome fear. This is a teaser for us because we're going to talk about fear later and other emotions, but we want to tease us into understanding about telepathic communication, communication into worlds, mediumship, obsession, so we can think about, at our level, how we feel certain feelings sometimes out of the blue. And the books by Andrea Lewis, through the medium Chico Xavier, and Valdo Vieira, tell us about the approximation of some spirits and how we start feeling things, even having epileptic seizures. So, we escape because disturbing emotions are boiling up. We want to escape because we want to preserve ourselves, but sometimes we escape in such a negative way. So, escape mechanisms can be detrimental to us if we do it just without consciousness and not really to deal with the disturbing emotions we have with us. What are the consequences? Joanna De Angelis talks about the consequences of escapism, escape mechanisms, if we let it go loose. First, this so-called moral incongruency. What is it? We're going to do things we don't even approve of ourselves. I hear people in my profession, I do, and talk about all sorts of things that they say, I do this because I wasn't feeling well, but I don't like it. I don't approve of it. Vanessa, what would I do? So they are in this conflict. It just generated more conflict because they're trying to escape, but through a route that they themselves do not approve. Of course, naturally, they will feel unloved, betrayed, left out, frustrated. They will lower their self-esteem and feel inadequate. And of course, it's going to push them into maintaining that emotional immaturity where they cannot develop higher ideals. And inevitably, it's going to bump into relationships, having a hard time developing harmonious relationships with people. So, escaping is never going to help us. And you may ask, how do I overcome this, right? Solutions. Here we're going to give the problem, the solution, because we don't have time for another day talking about solutions. We're not in academia to overwhelm ourselves with the ins and outs of everything. I would say read this book by Joanna De Angelis, Existential Conflicts. Read the books by Andrea Luiz, through Chico Xavier. But right now, we need to go straight to the solutions. What are the solutions to avoid escaping? We need to strengthen our personality. But we're talking about immortal, our unique personality. You and I are unique. Unique. You are unique. There's nobody like you. There's nobody like me. There's nobody like us in the world. So strengthen our personality. We're going to talk about it. Baby steps to inner victory, she says, to this inner strengthening. Practicing, and I will correct right here, good actions. Apologize. Good actions. Working on self-forgiveness, self-approval, and overcoming emotions such as guilt, fear, anger. We're going to talk about these emotions here. How do we do it? We need to take a positive route. At the end of this talk, I will show you the book, but I'll mention it right here. Besides the books by Joanna De Angelis, in science nowadays, in positive psychology, Martin Seligman has been at the leading, at the frontier of these studies. He's at Penn State University, has a beautiful research, and he talks about in several of his books how we can strengthen ourselves into a positive approach. So when you are not approving of yourself, looking at your shortcomings is not going to help. Oh, but I'm a bad person. That's why we can't say this to children either. When they say, I'm not good enough, say, remember, you're a child of God. When you say you're a bad person, you're saying God didn't know what he was doing when he created you. It's an ultimate insult to God. For those who are watching us, if we don't take the God-centered approach, we won't go far. We won't go far. At the School of Emotion, I work with any patient, but I tell them, if you don't have a religion, we will not go far. Why? Because then there's no reason why we are going to love ourselves. Why do you love yourself? I don't know. Oh, because I love myself. But why? If you're going to die and there's nothing after death. Why the effort? I remember at the University of Maryland, a neuroscientist, we were doing some experiments looking at the microscope. He was going to teach me some new tricks in the microscope. He was a bright scientist. And I never mentioned about anything, but people knew my beliefs. People nowadays can find anything on the internet. And he looked at me and said, Vanessa, why believe in the afterlife? And I said, why not? What's the purpose of your life here? You're such a good guy. You arrive before anybody else in our department. You're the last one to leave. You work so hard. What for? What's the purpose? If life is going to end, who cares about the next generation? That's not an excuse. Oh, for the next generation, who cares? You're not even married. You don't have children. So why working that hard if at the end of the day everything is going to disappear, if there's no God? He couldn't answer my question. We just stopped right there. He said, yeah, I don't know. See, that's where we stop. Limited reasoning, bright mind, but limited reasoning. We need to expand ourselves. When people tell me, Vanessa, my husband, my wife, they're very rational. I need to tell them about science and spiritism or spiritualism, I say, no. Don't give me that. Because when we're truly rational, as Kardec said, we will inevitably come to questions as Kardec did in the Spirit's book. And the answers are very easy to be reasoned. It will be hard to confront the answers of the Spirit's book, for example, and say, this does not go through in my reasoning, because there's no dogma there. It's pure reasoning. So when we're really, really, really rational, inevitably, we're going to come to a point that to strengthen our personality, we need God. Because then I love myself because God created me. And God is the supreme intelligence. God is so wonderful. Look at the world around us. He did things that I don't even understand. So it must be a good thing, I conclude, because I observe nature. The more I study, the more I am fascinated by this intelligence that created it. And then I adventure thinking, wow, if I am created by this supreme intelligence, I'm great. I'm great. So I love myself because I was created by a supreme intelligence that really cares for me. And then I will work on myself. If God allow me to make mistakes, why am I going to punish myself? Self-sabotage. We need to talk to God. I remember this guy telling me, Vanessa, I feel this desire. I am married, but I think of other women and then I feel like masturbating. I feel guilty. I say, look, who created this mechanism? Was it you? God created the pleasure. You didn't invent it. You're not the first inventor of pleasure related to sex or even to food. People have a hard time doing diets, going through a diet, because they feel that pleasure. So we need to have a conversation with God to understand how we can trim down, tame those passions. In the Spirit's book by Kardec, Kardec asked about passions, and the good Spirit said, passions are not bad because they are a driving force, but we need to tame them. It's like a horse. A wild horse may be beautiful, but it doesn't do much to progress. But when I domesticate this horse, then the horse may still be beautiful, but very productive, very helpful. The same for our passions. So then I take baby steps to that inner works, approving of myself and doing good actions. Prayers, visualizations, meditations, work. But it cannot stop there, because it's in the encounter of others that we're going to stop escaping away. So let's go a little deeper now. How often we escape because of emotions such as fear. I am afraid, so I'm gonna close my ears, close my eyes, right? Well, Joanna De Angelis talks about fear in that very chapter in one of the chapters about the book Existential Conflicts. And this may become a disturbing emotion. But when we go to the psychological sciences literature, we come to know that any negative emotion is present because it's giving us a sign that something is a threat, the unknown, or something we know, a stimulus that we know. So I may see somebody who is a threat to me and I start feeling afraid. I may see an object that was associated with a bad experience and feel fear related to it. That disturbing emotion, if not treated, if not consciously dealt with, is going to eat us up. So let's talk a little more about the causes of fear. There is what we call an endogenous factor and exogenous, inside of us and outside of us. Unhappy behaviors from previous lives and the fear of being identified or discovered. Of course, we don't want people to know who we truly were, right? Do we? Thank God we forget about everything. And there are people who want to dig deeper. But why? Some people ask me, Vanessa, would you recommend regression therapy? It depends. First, you need a good therapist. And second, why dig into something that God asks you to forget? Learning to forget is so important. To displace memory, even neuroscience. So I will stop just for a second, just to think about it together. When we have a hard time forgetting, that remembrance of an event that is causing disturbing emotions is going to make us vibrate differently. In the book Evolution in Two Worlds, Andrea Lewis talks about, in chapter 19 of part 2, how making mistakes and the remembrance of those mistakes make us susceptible to illnesses. Because it creates what he says, a nodule, like a knot, a vibratory knot in the spiritual body. And that is going to vibrate, and it has to be flushed out into a physical body. And of course, it flushes out in disease form. So, learning to forget all evils, practicing this is so important. And you may ask, how do I do it? So recently, in the 21st century, in the second decade of the 21st century, because 2020 is the third decade of the 21st century. In the second decade, halfway through 2015, a beautiful article was published in a neuroscientific newspaper talking about how to displace bad memories. And this was done in people who were in the army in the United States and developed post-traumatic stress disorder, and how to displace those traumatic memories. And they concluded, to their surprise, based on imaging studies, that if you build new, healthy, good memories, it's going to displace the bad memories. So we need new memories to displace the bad memories. How do I forget all evils? By focusing on the good, by accumulating good, healthful experiences. No wonder Chico Xavier, the Brazilian medium, who is unsurpassing in his mediumistic abilities and humanitarian heart, he himself was daily advised by his spirit mentor, stop your mediumistic works and go help some people who are in need. Some people think they're being very charitable by staying online all day long, talking to people. No, no, no. It's also charitable to stop teaching, to stop mediumistic works, and seek the needy and give what they need. Because sometimes, more than a message from the beyond, people need bread. And nowadays, with the pandemic, there are people who are out of jobs. There are people who have their financial means lowered, who have children to care for. We can't, nowadays, more than ever, even in the United States and in Europe, in developed countries, we need to restructure our outreach, because right now we're back at some point to material needs we haven't had before because of the pandemic. So inevitably, we need to create more memories. I will go back here to telling more about how important it is to understand the root causes of fear, obsessions, our connections. That's why it's endogenous, because it depends on our inner thinking and the connection with the mental currents, but also external factors, exogenous factors, like the upbringing of the person. If I was born in a family that was very violent, abusive, I would tend to be more susceptible to feeling anxiety. Studies show it to us, the long-term effects of experiences in childhood, even prenatal life. The disrespect for the identity of the child, of the baby. I remember Mentor Joseph in Virginia. Our daughter was just a baby. He taught me, when you change your child's diaper, ask for permission. Be respectful. Don't turn your head away. Oh, it's nasty. Because some parents do this. And they are already creating a lot of conflicts in terms of their own genitals, thinking it's dirty. It's all unconscious. We pass it on to our children. So we need to be respectful. When people talk about sexual abuse, it begins, the roots of it all begins there when we're babies. When parents are not respectful when they have to change the diapers of their children. I'm not saying that parents are abusive, but they do not respect. We need to ask, this is not my body, it's the body of the child. So I say, excuse me, I'm going to change with all my love this diaper. Be gentle, be kind, be respectful, be loving. And the products that come out, they're coming out of what they are drinking, what they are eating. That's all it is. They're not eating junk. So we need to make a lot of emotional exercises, not to pass on this disgust, because then there is this unconscious association, and then we feel dirty related our genitals, for example, our reproductive parts. These are topics that are almost like a taboo for us to talk about, but we need to talk about as well. Things that are generated in our childhood as well. So how do we get rid of fear? If it were that easy, I would say, depending on the level, we need a good therapist, psychological help to overcome them, okay? Not forever, but for critical times. Joanna De Angelis says, be aware of your fears. So she's right. We need to be conscious about fears. We need to be aware. Then face these fears. Face meaning they are not eating us up. We need to see what they are, not putting in the closet like, I don't want to talk about it. No, let's talk about it. We're still here. Let us work on it. to transform these fears, she says. And the greatest therapy of all, we're going to talk at the very end, love and prayer. Prayer passes. So helpful. If people knew it, they would change themselves. Neuroscientists like Dr. Pillai, we've interviewed at Cardiac Radio. He has a book about overcoming fear. And we have Dr. Benson from Harvard University, both at Harvard. Dr. Benson shows how prayer can change our gene expression, gene activation, or deactivation by praying. So prayer is fully effective in terms of even, remember when we talked about the current into certain areas of the brain, developing fear? The reverse can happen as well. These mental, electromagnetic currents that are formed in prayer can be true stimulus, decreasing fear, taming fear, if and only if we are courageous to face our fears. No wonder Jesus said to Bartholomew, and I quote in chapter 8 of the book Good News, through Chico Xavier in his psychography, we come to know of this beautiful dialogue between Bartholomew and Jesus when he says the trademark of those who follow the Christ consciousness is joy, hope, and courage. Courage about what? Courage about these things, facing our fears. That's why we can reason it together, but not only reason, work on it. And we say together because I doubt if we can do it alone, whether with the help of discarnates or incarnates, family members, friends, professionals. Together, we can conquer it. By ourselves, I don't think we can do it. Then the other very troubling emotion that we feel that generates escape mechanisms. We're escaping from our existential conflicts, guilt. It's one of the most difficult ones, and we need to prepare even our children to feel it, because guilt, if you are a human being, guilt is just also natural. Why? Because God allows us to make choices. So, if guilt has causes in previous lives or in our childhood because of the way we were brought up, we can overcome it by having that inner dialogue with God. This is just a teaser. We'll talk more about it. If we don't release guilt, work on it, we will, says Joanna De Angelis in this book, Existential Conflicts, we will develop depression, self-punishing thoughts, self-sabotage, afflicted feelings. We're going to feel less undervalued, feeling discomfort, distrust. And in the book, Thought and Life by Emmanuel through Chico Xavier, we get to know of a specific chapter named Guilt, when André Luiz, hand in hand with these teachings of Joanna De Angelis, he's going to say that it's going to change the way we interact with people. When I visit nursing homes, by the body language, I can tell. We can tell. Studying behavioral sciences for so long, you can tell when guilt is so present, unreleased, compressing their mind. It changes the way that person looks at us. It changes the way they reply to questions. It changes the way they feel about themselves. So why not work on guilt? So how do we release guilt? It's almost like a gift, right? To release guilt. If we open this box, we're going to find humility and forgiveness within it. Forgiveness and humility. How so? Who gave you the opportunity to choose God? If God allowed you to choose, is God sadistic? That's an important question. Is God sadistic? Giving you freedom to make choices that you're going to regret? No. God is allowing you because He knows that through the route you choose, sooner or later, sooner if we choose the right, later if we choose the non-right, the wrong one, we're going to find a way out. That humbles us, saying, well, if God allowed me, I'm going to find my way out. So I recognize that's humility. I find in God the greatness of life, and I say, God, like Paul of Tarsus, Saul, Paul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, he had to humble himself and say, I made a mistake. That's why in the Heaven and Hell book by Kardec, he says, at some point we need to repent. But not this repentance that people feel like they have to crucify themselves. It's just this awareness. I shift my awareness. I'm like, I realize that that was not the best approach. Okay. And then I need to forgive myself. Compassion, and start anew. Humility is big part of releasing guilt. Only when we recognize God's greatness and we humble ourselves to God's designs, we are able to release that guilt. That's why Jesus at the cross said the magical statement. It's magical because if we realize it, it changes our perspective. He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. We don't know. I don't know many things that I may doing today, feeling today, in 10 years, 100, 1,000. I'm going to look back at this moment and say, oh my gosh. Things that for society may be okay, but in the long run of life, not okay. Then I look back and I have compassion. Look at the book Sex and Destiny. I love that book in terms of dealing with guilt. Brother Felix, the mentor of those two families, he was the one who incited those two family groups into a mess, a chaos, due to his selfishness and pride. 150 years later, not only recognizing his mistakes, but already ready to help. He is there one by one, dealing, helping the very people he pushed to an abyss of illusions, let's say this way. Can we talk about two more feelings before we wrap up and go to the major solution of it all? Joanna De Angelis talks about this other very disturbing emotion that will generate a lot of existential conflict, resentment. And she says that resentment is developed in pride, in the need for power, in frustrations, holding grudges. But let's ask ourselves, are we resentful people? Often we're going to say, no, I'm not. But that person, what they've done, what they are doing, we are. Because we think, who are they to do this to me? Well, they are who they are. Deep inside, because of our need for power in our relationships, not about organizations, When it ends up bumping into organization, it's already an escalation of our relationships. So, pride. And for us Spiritists here, we need to work on this. Why? Because, for example, nowadays I'm Brazilian as well, not only American, but I'm also Brazilian. And many people feel this pride of Spiritism being so strong in Brazil, as if Brazil is now the king of the world in terms of Spiritism. It's not. That pride doesn't help us. There is nobody who is more, entitled to these teachings than any human being in this world. We were not the chosen people. Each nation has a mission, but we're not going to be the heart of the world by being full of pride. We needed to really overcome it. And that's why we create frictions in our relationships, because of that pride, that need for power. And then the inevitable frustrations that we feel because people feel like we feel. And then inevitably we're going to be resented. And resentment can be very destructive, creating disturbing conflicts inside of us and in our relationships, also escalating to depression when we feel in that power struggle we cannot win, and even predisposing us to the escalation of revenge. And revenge can be active or passive, sometimes very passive in terms of gossip. When people talk to us and they're not very truthful, they have a sweet voice and say, oh, but that person, I'm not so sure if I should trust that person. There you go. You already avenged the person you dislike. And then inevitably, it's going to make us susceptible to low order spirits. Some that feel just like that regarding us. They are resented from previous lives or even in this life, and creating true spiritual obsessions. If you want to know more about spiritual obsessions, please go. 2 main books. The Medium's Book by Kardec, chapter 23, all about obsession. And then you can extend a little bit more in one more chapter that is published by the British Union of Spiritist Societies, Thought in Life. There's one whole chapter named Obsession that summarizes it all and tells how we have the power to prevent obsessions and to treat it as well. So what is the therapy? Joanna De Angelis says, the liberation therapy for resentment. Here we go. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Right. That's why Jesus said, if we follow him, it's so light and easy. But we don't. We prefer to be stressed and power struggling. Let it go if people want to feel like they have the power. Power of what? Only God has the power. Not even the president of any country has any power that sustains for lives. No. Look at the Caesars of the Roman Empire. When I read the books 2,000 years ago and 50 years later by Emmanuel Turcico Xavier, I love it because I see, for example, Pontius Pilate. He was an interesting personality. He discarnated. He committed suicide. Emmanuel tells us that after discarnation, at some point, he shows up in Rome at a festivity in spirit form, and he is jealous about the progress of the Roman Empire, the festivities he cannot participate in the flesh, showing to us he had evolved very little back then. That's hard. What about practicing hope, practicing kindness, practicing faith, practicing this healthful pleasure, wisdom, the pleasure of helping others, right? The pleasure of practicing our spirituality, gaining some renewed wisdom. So here's a book that I will recommend to those who want to practice virtues that can shower our resentment away. This book, The Family Virtues Guide by Linda
We seem to have lost your sound there, Vanessa.
All right, back again.
There we go.
Thank you. So I don't know where I stopped, but I was showing this book,
You just
Lawrence.
picked that up, and you stopped when you got to saying the author's name.
All right, thank you. So here is, thank you so much, the Family Virtues Guide. And here is this beautiful book by Linda Popov. And I'll put it a little closer for you to see it. And I appreciate this book very much because it's very easy to work with children, youth, couples. And it's a beautiful proposal. It seems thick, but it's not. And it has a list of virtues that can help. Joanna De Angelis tells us about this practice of positive feelings, substituting negative ones. Even in the book, Happy Life, she says, substitute negative thoughts, negative feelings. That's a good technique. So when I have my child, Virginia, and I do it with myself, sometimes in family here, say, things are not going well, and I say, okay, let's have a beautiful thought now. Tell me a beautiful thought. I don't know, Mommy, I don't know. Think about something beautiful. In this room, tell me, point something beautiful in this room. Could be a plant, could be an animal, could be a picture, could be us just giving a hug on each other. Let us reset and focus on that good. So refocusing on good feelings can displace difficult ones. When they become a pattern, we need help. That's a sure thing. And one more, I'll show you one more. Emotion, and I left it for last, anger as an emotion that is so common, especially nowadays because of the pandemic. People are feeling angry. Where does this anger come from? Well, animals feel it too. It's in all animals. Okay? And it's a defense mechanism. Joanna De Angelis says that in humans it's about wounded ego. But in all species, we're going to see from animals to humans that it is a way to identify a threat and protect ourselves from a threat. So how do we turn this off? Because you can turn it on or off. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk who won the Nobel Peace Prize, he's from Vietnam. He is fantastic. He has a book that talks about anger, and the subtitle is Cooling Down the Flames. It's very good because it talks about how managing anger can be so productive and efficient if and only if we understand the source of threat. What is threatening you to make you angry? Why is this making you angry? What is the threat? So when we talk about origins of anger, it can be from previous lives, but environmental factors, as we're saying, threats. And it has everything to do with our existential conflicts. Because sometimes we see somebody in front of us who has much of, let's say, problems that we do, but we are angry at it in us. We project it onto others without noticing, and we start being mad at people that present that characteristic. And we don't realize that we are blaming on others, being angry at others, at things that are in us. So, to know more of ourselves, question 919 of the Spiritual Book by Kardec. The more we know ourselves, the more we progress, the less we make mistakes. Ask, if these in others push buttons on me, why is that? And why is this a threat that makes me feel I need to protect myself and push away with anger? So what is the therapy for anger? First, get to know you feel angry. Second, don't say you are an angry person. You're just in a crisis of anger, but don't label yourself, I am an angry person. Practice silence, but not this silence that you just swallow it up. Breathing exercises, like Dr. Benson says, very useful for anger management. Abdominal breathing, boosting the relaxation response in our physical body, turning on the parasympathetic system when anger is off. Physiologically, we turn off by turning off the sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight, and turning on the parasympathetic by practicing relaxation breathing, going for a walk, doing yoga, talking to a therapist, saying a prayer. There are 10,000 ways. Read the book Relaxation Revolution by Dr. Heber Benson by Harvard University, and you see how it can be very productive in managing anger. And consider yourself as perfectible beings. We are growing. We're learning. People are learning too. Patience. Joanna De Angelis, as the friendly spirit in the Gospel according to Spiritism, has a message about patience. And the therapy, thank you, Tanya Moore, for translating it in the way that our British friends understand. Passes here in America means passes therapy is the laying on of hands, the healing passes, the healing therapy. Okay, that can be so effective. I'll never forget when a girl who was 19 years old left the psychiatric hospital. Her mom called us in the Spiritist Society of Virginia and said, can I bring her to the center because she's in an anger moment now? Sure, bring her to the center. We had a special session for her. Prayer passes, the healing treatment, right? The laying on of hands. She left, changed. Well, of course, we need a long-lasting therapy, but it can be effective in acute scenarios too. That's a discussion for another day, right? Finally, to wrap up, because we had to compress so much, but to come to the solution. We're coming close to Valentine's Day, and Valentine's Day is not about dating or marriage no, it's about love. It's about recognizing our relationships. Joanna De Angelis talks about it in the book Existential Conflict. Chico Xavier, Emmanuel through Chico Xavier, ends the book Thought and Life talking about love. And we're showing how these different spirits are on the same page in that regard. Yes. And we see even science nowadays talking about love as a solution for our existential conflict. Knowing that love exists in animals. We see it in embryonic stages, as André Louis says in the book Evolution into Worlds. Joanna De Angelis says that we, even in lower forms in nature, we already see the presence of this force of attraction. Leon Denis, in the book After Death, talks about this force of attraction between us, beings, as love. So Joanna says, love is a solution when we learn to develop it. Did you know that today you are more capable of loving than you were in previous lives? Because we progress, we never regress. And did you know that tomorrow we will be more loving, more capable of loving than today? Now that we have consciousness, we need to put a focus on it. So wake up every day feeling, instead of surrendering to the conflicts and disturbing emotions, working on them gently, telling yourself, I am love. I am a child of love because God is love. And sublimating. The word sublimation that we borrow from psychoanalysis, and Joanna De Angelis uses in her books, is very interesting because it talks about elevating our everything to a higher form of expression, one that is more effective, productive. So instead of surrendering to instincts, cutting that chain of reactivity of our instinctive tendencies, as Kardec says, for many lives, sublimating, rechanneling it through arts, because our brains have the capacity for artistic form. And nowadays, I see society suffering. And this is one of the things that we recommend at the School of Emotion. Pick your form of art, not to be an artist, but to practice art. Because your right hemisphere needs art to express who you are. We can't only do things that are intellectual. We'll be impaired. We're much more than that. So pick a form of art and enjoy expressing your co-creativity, because you're co-creator with God, through art as well. That's a form of sublimation as well. And Joanna De Angelis says, love is the essential basis for a happy existence. For those who are here, we would say Joanna De Angelis, Emmanuel, all these authors that came through the mediums in Spiritism, they are hand in hand. Like the science nowadays is just coming back to prove to us. Dr. Martin Seligman, in this book, Authentic Happiness, in other books, Flourish, and others, he talks about how important it is to seek the good, feel the good, visualize the good, and mold the good with all the resources you have at hand to conquer terrain in regards to our existential conflicts and live a much better life. Love is in the air. I'm going to stop here and talk with you, friends.
You're on mute, Fabricio.
Oh,
There
sorry.
you go.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that. It's a wonderful talk. One thing that I picked up when we were saying, and it came to my mind, you hear a lot of people say, oh, I need to be more spiritual. And the way I can become more spiritual if I repress my passions. And it's very interesting because you mentioned one of your quotes, you said, passion are not bad because they are driving force. Could you elaborate on that? Because there is, I think, a misunderstanding when people say, oh, in order for me to be more spiritual, I'm not allowed to feel any of those passions. And I think I'd like you to hear from you a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Fabrice, what a question. It's so important because many people go through spirituality, their spiritual path, also as escape mechanism. And that's pretty bad. That's why we see problems in human relationships in spiritual communities, because they are not there to bloom. They're there to repress, to run away. And they're going to encounter exactly what they're escaping from. It's the law of attraction. So we can't escape from who we are. And we can't elect a spiritual path as a way to run away from our passions, but to educate our passions. To educate. And that's why I love Spiritism, because it teaches us how to educate it. How to first and foremost, awareness, consciousness. I need to be aware. What are my passions? What are they? For example, people talk about vanity, right? Some people, Fabrizio, they tell me, I remember when we started Kardec Radio 10 years ago, and I was the only host, and I started inviting people. People are like, oh, but I'm afraid. Who am I? And I understand because I had the same feelings when I started, but I had to conquer it. And some people say, Vanessa, isn't it about vanity when you're there in front of cameras? And I say, no, I don't think it's vanity. Vanity is not about showing up in front of a camera. Vanity is what you feel, whether you have a camera in front of you or not. I may have no cameras on me and yet feel that I am the greatest. I can have no access to Twitter, Facebook, any social media, and yet incite a rebellion somewhere else by talking to people who are close to me and making them believe that I'm the greatest, like I'm an emperor of a new era. That's vanity. It doesn't need a camera. So running away from passions into spirituality is not going to solve. But if I use my spiritual practice, my spiritual philosophy to educate them, I can use my passions to do great good for me and consequently for everybody else. Makes sense, Fabrizio?
Yeah, totally. Because it's interesting because there is this thought that in order for you to become spiritual, you need to combat your passions. But then one thing that comes to my mind is there were a scene that is described in the Bible where Jesus has shown some kind of anger when he turned the table. And people say, well, but how come someone at that level, a pure spirit, can demonstrate that? But it's not about not feeling the anger, but what you do with the anger, right? And
Yeah, I don't think he felt angry when Kardec talks about that passage in the Genesis. He talks about the power of his firmness. You know, when your mom used to look at you in a certain way without words, or your dad, and I have children telling me now as adults, I wish they would have spanked me. They would have done something. It would have hurt less than that look. So Kardec talks about it. Jesus was so vibratorily firm that people interpreted as children because we're like children before him. And oh my gosh, as if he did. I don't think it's really any sort of violence because he's the master of nonviolence. I think it's just the way we interpreted the power of his firmness. And it's beautiful. The combination, the balance between such compassion and love, plus the courage, the determination, and the firmness he had.
indeed. I have got some questions that is popping up here on Facebook. One question that come from our friend Bob Williams. He says, are not Spiritism or Christianity forms of escapism for us to help us transfer or reduce the difficult emotions we face in life?
All right. Hi, Bob. Thank you for this question. Such an important question. I would say for some people, it may be escape mechanism. I agree. As we said, it depends on your deep intentions. And I would say at the end of the day, in that pathway of escaping away, you're going to find there's no way to escape. We may temporarily be stuck in illusions and repressing ourselves, using that knowledge to repress passions, emotions, but it won't be for long. When we talk about immortality at some point, and I'll give you one book that can clarify that. The book by Memoirs of a Suicide by Yvonne Pereira, The Spirit Camilo. Why? Because in the Institute in the Spiritual Realm, Mary of Nazareth, so beautiful. They talk about the rehabilitation of suicidal spirits in the spiritual realm, but we see ourselves there too, in these rehabilitation processes in between reincarnations. And there is a moment they use what they call moral therapy. So they have this spirit that was very deceiving on earth, that he was homicide and suicide. And in the spiritual realm, he's going through some form of therapy. So they have therapists from Hindu background mixed with Christian background there. They use what they call moral therapy. So they talk about the method and how that can be very liberating when we learn to face our existential conflicts that independ of the physical body. In mediumistic meetings, we often see spirits, discarnated spirits, entrapped in existential conflicts too. So it can be very therapeutic. The Christ conscious approach, the Spiritist approach, can be very liberating if and only if we use it for that purpose, or we can escape, but not for long.
Vanessa, before we go to our closing prayer, is there any closing remarks that you'd like to make?
I just would like to remind all of us of one exercise that I saved for this moment, Fabrice and Lawrence. Martin Seligman has a beautiful exercise in his research. He has shown to us that we can increase happiness in a tangible way, transforming our well-being, our state of well-being, by practicing what he calls what went well exercise, or 3 blessings. So every night before we go to sleep, we spend 10 minutes before we sleep. He says, write down, but if you don't want to write down, at least we wrote down in our minds the 3 things that went well that day and why. The 3 blessings exercise. This is science, merging with all the teachings we're studying here, the practice of self-love, of positive thinking, positive feeling, seeking the blessings in life. That exercise can be a great boost for us in our daily lives.
We will give that a go.
All right.
Some homework for you there, Lawrence.
There is another question just come in from Isabel.
Oh, Isabel is she is the wife of our friend who is going to speak here in the Joanna De Angelis series in September, right?
Who is her husband?
Luis Lima.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Great Spiritist scholar. He studies much. He has much to share, and I love them both. Thank you, Isabel. You want to read the question?
Yeah, so she says, as neuroscientist, have you observed or known of a transition point from anger to peace by means of prayer?
Isabel, I wish I had done that research. I can't do that research because I'm biased, because I believe in prayer. But I would say Dr. Andrew Newberg, the founder of a new field in neuroscience named neurotheology. Neurotheology. He has been researching on prayer and its effects on the brain and the thinking of God. So we would say, scientifically speaking, when we turn on prayer and the physiological events that happen in our nervous system and the whole body, it turns off our anger mechanisms by nature. Because when we pray, we go into the mode of the parasympathetic activation. Inevitably, we're going to turn off that mode. But it's hard to pray while in anger. So that's why nowadays for us, we have phones. We have the luxury of having all these apps or even YouTube videos in which somebody's praying, doing visualization, and they can help us calm down and getting into a more parasympathetic state, a relaxed state, a state of peace of mind.
Thank you very much, Vanessa.
Thank you.
I have got some invitations to make. So our next Spiritist night is on the 22nd of February. Our speaker is Flavio Zanetti. The topic that he's going to be discussing with us is the Spiritist view of Jesus, our Christ. And so I look forward to see you all on the 26th. Thank you very much, every one of you that has been here with us tonight. Thank you once again, Vanessa, for being with us.
I'm very thankful. Thank you. It's a joy to be here. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you, friends.
Thank you. And Lawrence, I would like to invite you to do first our closing prayer.
Thank you, Fabrizio. So once more, dear friends, just draw into that peace, that oasis of calm that resides within us all. And just give thanks for this evening's understandings, for all the lessons there for us to take up if we so choose, to learn to draw closer to God, to learn to draw closer to the divine within, that unending link that lives forever. Amen.
Thank you, Lawrence. So I wish you all a very good evening or a good afternoon or a good day for wherever you are. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now.
Bye, everybody.